In process. Hello, everyone, and I've got wonderful Alyson Williams here. I haven't met Alyson in person, but I've known her on Facebook, and I'm so excited that she agreed to come and have a chat about her life and what she does, because we've got so many beautiful people out there who either feel shy to share or not quite sure, and I might be stepping out. Now, Alyson and I love words. So we might have a few moments where we might have to just sort of go, oi, let me just come into. But because we know each other, we have a lot of respect. So just to introduce you before I hand over to Alyson. Alyson, as you can see, I love all her things. She's a bling angel. I'll get her to explain that to you because I don't really understand it fully. She's an empowerment strategist, but she supports women on their self-love journey because she really believes that's the key to all their successes. Welcome.
Thank you, Chantal. I am just so appreciative of this opportunity, not only to have a chat with you, because, as you said, we've known each other more than a year now, but we've only met virtually, and that's been enough to create the bond that we have. And I've also been so grateful and lucky to have experienced you doing an Akashic record reading for me. Yeah, so pardon my tongue twistedness. Yeah, so we have connected on many levels, and I've benefited from your beautiful services and offerings. So I really love, just connecting with you and getting together with you and having this conversation is just another beautiful connection. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, Alyson. My pleasure. Would you like to just share something about yourself that you feel? How did you get to this point? Was it your self-love journey? How did you fall into it? A bit about your background. What would you like to share? How would you like to go on this? I'm going to keep bringing up self-love because I think that's been part of my journey of healing too.
Sure. And self-love is absolutely the pivotal point, the crux of what I do. Now, I've been very lucky. I'm the youngest of 5 children. My mother was a teacher and very active in the community, doing lots of community work, etc. And she would have been 100 this year had she been born. And she was definitely a woman ahead of her time for a whole lot of reasons. Firstly, her mum believed in women having an education so that they weren't reliant on a man for their income, for their economic well-being, as so many people are trapped in marriages for that reason. And I think my grandmother was as well.
Can I just pause, explain why that's important? We're happy to share your heritage or where where you come from, because I think that's important to also talk about why it's so important.
Sure. So I am ethnically what's called an Anglo-Indian, and an Anglo-Indian is someone who has a combined British Indian heritage. But it is specifically where the man was British and the woman was Indian. Now, in my own heritage, we've never been able to go back far enough to find one British and one Indian connection. The other thing with Anglo-Indians, it's not just anybody who has a British father and an Indian mother who becomes Anglo-Indian. An Anglo-Indian is actually a culture. It's an ethnicity because you're brought up with the traditions, etc., of being Anglo-Indian. Now, my kids are Anglo-Indian from me, but my husband, ex-husband, I should say, he calls himself an Aussie, but his father was Welsh and his mum was English. Ironically, he's a Williams as well. So I was a Miss Williams who married a Mr. Williams because my my father was a Williams because his dad, who came from Wales, was a Williams. So that's my ethnic background, if you like. But my grandmother was born, I don't know, I think my grandmother was born in 1900. So she was of a time, and again, in the society, we were very middle class in India. So she was of a time and a sort of strata in society where it wasn't seemly for women to work. And my grandfather was a lovely, charming man, but apparently he was quite irresponsible. And when he got angry with his boss, he'd come home and he'd talk about chucking in his job. So that made my grandmother very insecure, economically and financially. So she made sure that her daughters didn't have that handicap, that they would then be able to go out and earn a living for themselves if need be. And that was part of my mum's sort of background. Now, my grandfather, for all that he wasn't, he was also a person he was very charming, apparently. I never met him, sadly, and full of confidence and what have you. And he instilled that in my mum. So she was brimming with confidence. And because she'd had this in her childhood, she then passed it on to us. So we were brought up to be fully confident in who we were, unashamedly, unapologetic, to have a standing, to say what we sort of felt and what have you. So that for me was a huge, huge, huge bonus and benefit in my upbringing, which I'm aware that not a lot of women have. But I then lost a lot of that when as I said, I had a year where my whole life fell in on my head. So I went from being a confident, outgoing person to becoming very anxious. Oh my God, I can feel that in my body, becoming very anxious, losing my confidence and needing somebody around me all the time.
Okay.
So what had happened in that time, and my mother had died, and while I was sad about that, we had a fabulous relationship. So one of the things she also taught me, oh my God, she's the, my role model and mentor. So she actually taught me that, treat someone well when they're alive rather than worry about it when they die. So when she was alive, I knew I wasn't the best daughter in the world, but I was the best daughter I could be. Everything that we needed to say was said between us. There was nothing left unsaid. So I had no regrets. And thank God for that lady, because she gave me just so much faith in myself and just connectedness with, not having any artificial guilt. Because I remember, being Catholic, I just had this guilt thing all around. Anybody who's Catholic will know that. Mm-hmm. So one of my brothers, was very kind of stoic, kind of, get stuff done and not worry about frippery sort of stuff. And I loved him, but, he used to also annoy me because that's what siblings do, right? And he sort of asked me to make him a cup of coffee. And I said, I don't want to make you a cup of coffee. And I said to my mum one time, I feel really guilty when Russell asks me to make him a cup of coffee and I don't want to. And she said, don't be silly. You can't feel guilty for that. You can only feel guilty for something that you've done deliberately to hurt someone. Okay. That was another liberating, moment for me. So I have now put guilt aside, thanks to my mother. So these are things that I've grown up with. And as I said, when I had my horrible annus horribilis, as the late Queen referred to her, annus horribilis, and I had my horrible year when everything went wrong. So I said my mum had died. Then I ended up with some health issues, which were brought on from work-related stress, because I had this horrible boss. I had to take 3 months off work, and that ended up in me having to move from a job I really loved, where I was keeping goals, only because he was this horrible person. In the middle of all this, my husband, 25 years, said that he wanted a divorce. Now, I knew the marriage hadn't been good for a while, because obviously you don't, suddenly want a divorce for no reason. But I always thought we'd find our way back to each other, because, there had never been anybody else. We'd never been sort of tempted outside. We never had affairs or any of that sort of stuff. And there was never, I don't believe, from either of our sides that need or that wanting to, to stray. So I just thought there was a lot of stress in his life, particularly because of work. And I just thought, he was, I don't know, I was sort of 53, he was 77 years older than me. So he was sort of getting towards sort of 60. So I thought that was kind of like what these days, because 60 is a new 40, like a middle-age crisis, right? And I just thought that was it. But then in the middle of all this, as I said, he said to me, I'll stay with you and see you through your illness, but then I'm out of here. That was a huge blow to me, because he had been my emotional security for 30 years, because even though we were only married for 25, we'd been together for 30. And then, of course, I was 53, what about, we'd planned this retirement together, what's going to happen to me economically? And oh my God, the whole world. And I didn't have my mum because she wasn't there. And my best friend had died the year before from ovarian cancer. So my support system wasn't there. And I was in Canberra, but, I live in Canberra and I have been all this time, but I grew up in Melbourne and most of my sort of connections were there. Now, the other complication was my son was on his gap year overseas. He was 19 and my daughter was 16, very vulnerable. She loved her grandmother and she really felt the loss of my mum. Her brother was away, so even though they had their frictions as siblings do, she was missing him. Compounding this, we lived out of town, in a place called Bungendore, which is about 25 k's out of Canberra. So that was kind of quite isolating as well. So we didn't actually want to tell her because we didn't want to put any other, and she'd been having some issues previously. We didn't actually want to sort of make things worse for her. So we thought we'd wait till my son came back. I mean, we couldn't afford to move for my husband to move out anyway because, it wasn't feasible financially. So we thought we'd wait for my son to come back and then we tell her. So in the meantime, we were living in this pressure cooker, if you like, without letting anybody know. So we didn't even tell the families if, in case they inadvertently let her know. So this was this very kind of stressed, environment where, I was dealing with all this stuff. And the person I needed most wasn't going to be there. Even though he was there physically, even though he was very good, he'd come with me to the doctors and all my appointments and all that sort of stuff. In the way I really needed him, he wasn't there.
Yeah.
So that was huge.
Yeah.
And it was after that that I went to do some personal development because I wanted to get back to being me. I'd already loved personal development that I'd done from one point to another because being a teacher as well, I love learning. And so I then ended up in a weekend seminar, because it's face-to-face in those days. Remember that? Yeah. And
yes, showing our age here.
I know, but I think it's everybody for COVID, pre-COVID, right? But so I went to this webinar where there was this I went to this workshop where there was a lovely young man at the front of the room doing amazing things and telling you how you could improve your life and how you can become more of you and all those sorts of things that really resonated with me. And I thought, I really like what this chap's doing. And I used to do that because I started my teaching career teaching adults and I loved it. I then went on to teaching high school kids, but my love was really with teaching adults. So I thought, I really love what he's doing and I would love to do that myself at some point. So I signed up to do coaching, yes, for me, but also with a longer term, goal to do coaching. And that's how I got here.
Amazing. I'm making notes. There's so many little poignant things here that you've been saying along the way. And I always make notes and then I highlight and, also for me to remember, because every time I have a conversation, you all give me a little nugget of gold as well, and I think here, I love something your mother said. So we'll go back. Let's just see where we're going to take this again. Where do we go back? So I did interrupt you at the very beginning when you were sharing about your grandmother and mother, because I think that's really important for women to know that's your history, but also how you then lost it. Because often we think we should remain strong. Something happens and we cling on to that, but cling on to that person when you're not. So I loved when your mother said guilt only when done something deliberate. I thought that was interesting. Also, you lost all your future dreams. So you lost your support system. So literally, like, it most probably wasn't overnight, but how everything all happened in one. Basically, then I wrote when your life fell apart, basically.
Yeah.
Pretty much all at the same time, within a time frame. And
absolutely.
Even with it was over a couple of years or so, it's still, isn't it? You just reeled from one to the other. And then the last thing, then I'll get you to tune into how to become more of you. So in fact, I'm just tuning into that. I'd love to hear how you became more of you, unless you want to pick something else up. So just, No,
I'm more than happy to talk about that because how I became more of me, and it's still a journey, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, until we die, this is a journey. One of my coaches and mentors called Joe Pane, who's a fabulous man. He does a podcast, look him up. He sort of says, we're either green and growing or ripe and rotting. And I'm going to be green and growing till the day I die because you know what? And that was something else my mum used to say, that nobody can ever know anything. Even as a teacher, she was more than happy to learn from the children. And she'd tell them that because so many teachers are really threatened when their kids know more than they do. But my mum, she was just a woman ahead of her time and such an amazing being. I was so grateful to have her as my mother, I can tell you. But she used to say to these kids, no, yes, tell me my son, or my girl, or whatever. That was her usual way of talking to people.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how old you are, either my son or my girl. So she'd be more than happy and more than willing to learn. And then say to them, thank you for teaching me that because I didn't know that. So that's other stuff that I've got from her as well.
Oh, thank you for I love that. Thank you for teaching me that. What was it? I didn't
Because
know
I
that
didn't know that before.
because I didn't know. Isn't that beautiful? Oh my gosh. And how often we didn't know that before. I love that exchange, like she's saying, and then the child can blossom or the person can blossom. Thank you.
Yeah.
And one little thing I'll say, just coming back, you said, what was it? Boy and girl. Was it what was it? Child.
My son and my girl.
That's right, my son, my girl, because William's part Sri Lankan, and they always say my child. So it doesn't matter
Yeah.
how old you are, it's my
Yeah.
child. And when I first met him, I thought, I found it grating with, but my child. So it's a form of
Yeah.
endearment, isn't it? So
It
again,
is.
what I'm loving about you sharing this, you bringing in that part of you, to show differentness. Anyhow,
Yeah.
sorry, I got a little bit excited about what your mother just said.
Oh, thank you for that. In fact, I'm writing a book, or I'm about to write a book called well, it was supposed to be, I haven't worked out a title yet because the title I've got is way too long. I had originally thought of The Getting of Wisdom, lessons I've learned from my mother and some of my own. So that's something I want to learn, because everybody I talked to about my mum, the Bling Angels, people in Canberra, even when my mum's group, when I used to meet, when the kids were little, they all love my mum.
Yeah.
And after she's passed, because the Bling Angels haven't met her, but they all say, "Oh my gosh, we love your mum. She's so wise, and you're so lucky to have her." And definitely, when we siblings have a chat and it comes up, we always say how lucky we were to have the mother that we did have, because she was just completely, different. I can give you another story, but I don't want to sort of, I don't want to, take up the time. We'll go where you want to.
No, stop, Alyson. Stop. This is coming back to self-love journey and all the sort of things. I'm going to actually go back to you. Love to hear your stories, because this is part of sharing that we see. Again, it's about showing everyone our stories are important. Your stories are important because you are. Because that is, mate, who you are and why you do what you do. So if you'd love to share that story, please do. If not, we'll just segue on to, whatever we were.
No, I'm just conscious of that, the fact that you have a time limit that you're working with. This story is more about my mum, and you're talking about learning from kids, so it's not so much relevant because we've already mentioned that. So happy to move on.
All right, okay. Plus, I am watching the time. Okay, my responsibility. So thank you, Alyson. So let's come back. Okay, so we've sort of segued a bit. Where would you like? Okay, how to become more of you? That's where we were starting, and that's how we came into the wisdom of your mum. And then you met that lovely young man to become a coach, or to be
So part of my whole journey, because I love learning, I've done all sorts of different modalities and spent a bomb on training and what have you. But each of those things has been so beautiful. And one of the things I've learned in terms of becoming who you are is owning your shit, as some people might say, right? I say it's loving yourself, warts and all.
Yeah.
Because nobody is perfect. And it's being okay with your imperfections. I used to say, even before the coaching thing, as long as I can look at myself in the mirror and say, you know what, you're not perfect, but I like you, that's all that matters. Because liking someone is so different from loving them.
Yes.
Now, the me that I used to be was a nice enough person, but she was very judgmental. And part of that, I think, is my mum had these standards that, I felt subconsciously and even consciously that I had to meet. And so that made me very conscious of doing things in a certain way to be a certain way. And that was fine for those days. But these days, things are different in many ways. And I mean, for example, like, when I did one of my Facebook Lives, my sister sort of sent me this beautiful private message saying, Ali, why don't you get dressed up or whatever? Because I think I just had on a t-shirt and I was in the backyard. Just get dressed up and put some makeup on and maybe some jewelry. And I go, Jen, actually, these days things are different. It's about being raw and real, right? So that's what I mean about some of the standards are changing for these days. But again, in terms of manners, that was a standard that very much had to maintain. And even language, grammar. And actually, my story was going to be about grammar. But anyway, so all those things about standards are very much my upbringing. And I appreciate that because that made me the person I am. But the downside of that, because I always say, everything that has to be two sides of the coin. So while the benefit of that was that I was able to achieve some standards of quality, the other side of that was then judgment, because then you're judging who's meeting the standard, who's not meeting the standards, including self-judgment, which is so debilitating and so self-defeating and self-sabotaging, you know, for our own being and coming into who we are. Now, I will definitely say that, you know, in my marriage, the judgmental thing was a huge factor in undermining the relationship. Luckily, you know, my ex-husband in many ways was a saint, because he was very accepting of a lot of this, but of course he's also human, so you know, it did take its toll, and I'm forever sorry about that. And I've made my peace with him, and I've asked for forgiveness, and I've forgiven myself, so I'm okay now with that part of my journey. But now I'm much less judgmental. So when I say I've come to finding myself, I'm not only finding who I used to be, I'm finding who I truly am.
Yes.
And that's my new journey, finding who I truly am, being really I'm getting goosebumps again.
Yeah.
But being in touch with my higher self, my true self, my pure self, if I might say, and that's the journey I'm on. So having had that divorce, which was so painful and so difficult at the time, you know, has made me a much nicer, softer, gentle person. And the coaching was part of the journey that got me there. That got me there. So now what I decided I wanted to do was use, like, unfortunately, unlike a lot of women that I've come across who have had so much trauma in their lives, you know, domestic violence and, you know, emotional and physical, sexual, whatever, physical trauma. I have been so grateful not to have that. But I now am able to bring my experience of changing. And I don't believe that you need to go through somebody else's experience to be able to, you know, offer them some awareness or just even holding space, which is what we were talking about before, right? And in fact, I had a beautiful experience with a friend who's also a fellow coach. We've just come back from holiday. So on our way up to the holiday, we stayed with this lady. And I'd only met her fleetingly, you know, at a conference, the first time we've met, but we really connected. And she said, you know, when you're going up to Queensland, come and stay with us. And I knew that she meant it genuinely because I just felt simpatico with her. Yeah. She, you know, she was very much, I could see me in her. And by that, I mean that I could see that she was genuine in offering that, and making that offer. Because if I say to somebody, come and stay with me, which I used to do when I was in Bangalore and we had a huge house, they come and stay with us. And I absolutely meant it. So I knew she was genuine. So we went and stayed and I learned more of her story. Mind blowing. Oh my gosh, what an amazing life this lady has lived. So much hurt and trauma and abuse, and you know how she's come out to be the beautiful butterfly she is on the other side. It is amazing. But if I might share, and I'm sure she won't mind, I mean, I haven't talked about who she is, but her mother, she has a lot of she was abused by her stepfather, and she has a lot of anger towards her mother. But we just had I wasn't doing any coaching because that's not what I was there for. I was just talking to her as a friend. And she was just so grateful that when we finished, she said the next morning, she says the first time she was able to think of her mother, who she never calls us her mother, she always calls her by her name. She said it's the first time I was able to think of her without anything. No anger, no, you know, I don't think she ever had no anger, no frustration, no anything. So it was just neutral. And she said, thank you for giving me that.
Yes.
Now, that was just something that came along as a course of conversation. And, you know, she's actually, one of the things she said to me, she said, I'm so sorry to put all that on you. And I said, no, you didn't put it on me. I said, because I was going through it with you. Because as she was talking to me, I was crying along with her. So, you know, I'm very much an empath. I'm not as empathetic as some people. There's a beautiful book about being an empath by Anita Morjani. And I realized that, you know, happily in a way, I'm only, you know, partly empathic. So I definitely feel what other people are feeling, but I don't necessarily lose myself in that.
Yes.
So as I said,
yes.
Yeah. So I said to her, not to worry, because I actually was on your journey with you. And thank you for trusting me, you know, to come along on the journey and to share with me. So I haven't taken it on. I have managed to release it as you were going through it. And as it turned out, so was she.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's sorry, go on. Yeah.
That was an amazing experience.
I can imagine that's right. And I think coming back to what you're saying, and this is what I've learned as well, and I think it was through Brené Brown's work, and I love Anita Morjani too, because she, anyhow, that's a whole nother conversation there.
Yeah.
But I think like you can have empathy, like you said, you don't need to know the story, but you have the emotion. So like you might not have had those, but what you went through, you experienced, you're like, you've experienced the aftermath of that, what it's done for you. And that's the power of the work that you do, is that with your empathy. And also, I'm just thinking here, because we've sort of got a few more minutes to go, talk about bling angels as well, because you've just explained one part, how you were able to support her as a friend, but without it being as a therapy or coaching, but also how you now introduce bling angel into what you do.
Okay. I'm just getting some of my cards, which are just at hand.
Yes.
So a Bling Angel is an Australian-only certification at the time. And we as Bling Angels use a game called Find Your Bling. Now, Find Your Bling has 8 decks of 100 cards. And the Find Your Bling game was started by Angie Rassi, who used to be a Louise Hay trainer. So people who know Louise Hay, she was the doyen of New Age as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. And she was all about affirmations. So Angie used to teach Louise Hay courses. And in the course of that, she then created a little fun game for her clients using affirmations. And she made kind of affirmation cards. Well, long story short, many years after that, she then launched the game to a really high-end looking classy game where it's called Find Your Bling because, it was mainly for women, and women, we all kind of love bling. And part of the whole message is find your diamonds within, because we all have diamonds within us. Everything we need is already within us, and we are beautiful creatures. In fact, I say with self-love, I want you to own your magnificence, because we are all magnificent. It's just a matter of owning it, because so often we look at what we're not rather than what we are. Anyway, so Find Your Bling, you can either play the game with people. So we Find Your Bling sessions where 2 people play together to make it intimate, and you sort of throw the die, or you come with a question, you throw the dice, and wherever you land, whatever color, you pick up a card of that color and you read the card in the context of your question. So your question might be, how can I make more money in my business? And this card, for example, from our Bling Boost deck says, you can connect with your inner genius. So if I say, okay, how does that card connect with increasing your business? You can then, talk about that. And because most of us are coaches, we then take it deeper. So the other day I had a 90-minute session just using 3 cards. And that woman was blown away by the session. She had been feeling depressed the day before. And after our session, she said she felt it was transformational.
Love it.
I know. Now, as a coach, I say you can't have transformation in one session, because coaching, that's why I offer coaching as a package. You have to have many sessions because it's growth. But with the Bling reading in one session, I guarantee you a breakthrough on your one question. Yes. Now, what happened with her, we had her question, and because some of the stuff was quite deep-seated, I actually gave her some strategies, which is what I do in my coaching anyway. So I gave her strategies that she could use to get to where she needed to go. I didn't do the strategies with her. I actually talked through some of them, which is why it took 90 minutes as opposed to 30. But I then gave her some ways by which to use the strategies. And I gave her a little bit of a sample of how she could do it. And that's why she came away feeling that she had gone from depressed to being full of hope and full of joy and full of love again, because her husband had died 30 years ago, and she kind of felt that because he was on a spiritual journey and he was one of the enlightened ones, that she wasn't able to talk to him because that would call him back. So we had a conversation around that, and she just felt that had now opened up that avenue of her to tap into her husband. So it was a really beautiful experience. So, a Bling reading can do all of that for you when you do it with a Bling angel. But if you're playing with somebody else, a friend or in your family, whatever, it has conversations. It opens up, areas of conversation that you might not have gone in, but the cards lead you there.
So I like that. I like that. Thank you. Sort of, because we're coming to the end, I just wanted to say to people, you can do this like online. So if someone lives anywhere in the world, you can actually do a Bling. You can do this. because ladies, with everyone who's watching, we are coming sort of to the end, but I'm going to put all the links to how to contact Alyson in the description. So Alyson, just right at the end, what is something you'd like to share? You've given so much fabulous information, different ways. How would you like to end this, and how can people contact you?
Sure. So how I'd like to end is to say basically that your past does not equal your present or your future. You are the author of your story. You get to write your story. You can leave the old stories behind and write a new one. Start with a fresh page, and I can help you write your story on your new page. Together, we will co-author, if you like, your story. As you know, we talk about the Bling card reading as being a co-creation session because it's something that we do together. You bring your question, but I don't know what your question is. I don't know how the interpretation, applies to your situation. Only you know that. What I can do is I can lead you there. I can poke you in those sort of hard places you don't want to be poked, and bring out the things that need to come out. So we can write this story together on your blank page.
Love it. Write story together. Thank you. Oh my goodness, this was so good. So how can we just voice it? And then, as I said, I'll put it in there. So where can they find you, Alyson?
So I'm best found on Facebook by Messenger, DM, but you can also book a strategy session, a 30 minutes consultation session through my Calendly link. And haven't been very active on LinkedIn, but I'm going to change that now. So in my LinkedIn banner, there's already, again, how you can book a session with me. But I really prefer to do, the talking. And absolutely, it doesn't have to be face-to-face. This woman I was talking about the other day with the 90-minute transformation session, she's in California. So, this happens across the world, and it doesn't matter where you are. We can connect as long as we get a common time.
Perfect. Thank you. And as again, I'll put the link, everyone, down there for the 30-minute strategy session, because that may be well worth doing. So thank you, everyone. If you've got any comments or anything you'd like to do, please put them in below, and one of us will get back to you. And thank you, Alyson, so much for sharing. I learned something again about you. So thank you, my friend.
My pleasure. So thank you again for the opportunity. And so lovely to catch up with you again, Chantal.
Isn't it? There's so many beautiful ways we can do this, isn't it? Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.